Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to today's Orchestrator Weekly meeting. On the agenda for today, we have at least two topics. We have the CLI, the KCLI project going on, and we have the problem that Paramiko is not really suitable for our specific use case. So, let's start with the first topic. Well, Miguel, I guess that's you, right?
You're right. Well, it's just to let the team know that there is a new plan that is used to set up a Kubernetes cluster and raise up a Ceph cluster using the rook operator. There is a pull request ongoing, and what I have seen is that it's possible to that in my laptop. You will need a powerful laptop, okay? Because in order to set up one master and a couple of workers, you will need enough RAM memory and probably hard disk if you want to do a test, some decent test. But I think that there is, it is going to make easy also to start uh, to develop integration test also with the Kubernetes cluster and Rook. And this is all from my part. Any comment and suggestions will be welcome.
How is the volume starting virtual machines?
I haven't run tests with the volume, so I can't say that.
It's using Vagrant. So the KCLI thing looks pretty similar to what is possible with Vagrant. I mean, I'm not really opposed to KCLI. We just have to convince everyone that we also have to install KCLI either on the Jenkins host, or I don't know. Whereas Vagrant is already there. But yeah, that doesn't really matter, right?
Well, I prefer KCLI. In that background is more complicated, okay? But
Definitely.
obviously it's more mature than KCLI. So each of the tools has advantage and disadvantage.
Yeah, interestingly, if you're having a super complicated Vagrant file, then you're coding Ruby. And if you have a complicated KCLI plan, then you're doing things with Jinja 2 templates. I mean, does it really matter, right? Either you're programming in Jinja 2 or you're programming in Vagrant. In Ruby. That's how it is. But I'm not really opposed to it.
Well, it's just an experiment. I mean, I think that it's positive to share the way that you set up your lab in your laptop and you do the test.
So let me add the Vagrant file that we're using for Ceph volume here in the Etherpad. It's the very same thing. So either you're iterating over a loop in Ruby, or you're iterating over a list of masters in Jinja 2? That doesn't really matter from a configuration point of view. Okay, thank you. Any thoughts? Nothing. Okay. Yeah, a few seconds ago, I've talked with Melissa about Paramiko, and I would like to bring it up to the group here. We've discussed it yesterday in the stand-up that Paramiko is a rather thick layer around SSH. So they're doing their SSH key handling on top of SSH again with some reduced functionality. They're doing very in-depth SSH option parsing with some reduced functionality on top of what SSH can do right now. And we are already hitting those limitations. So is Paramiko really the way to go for us? We're already seeing a few issues where we have to parse the logging output. We have to capture the logging output of Paramiko because Paramiko also is hiding error messages from us. And how can we go forward?
I mean, is the question what other libraries are available? Is that basically the issue?
Melissa, have you looked into async SSH?
I've heard about it, but I haven't looked into it. Because I thought we needed a synchronous library, but if async works as well, then I can check it out.
I
I
mean,
think that
we don't need the asynchronous implementation because everything we do is synchronous. But we could call an asynchronous library by just wrapping those asynchronous calls in synchronous calls. That works easily. So it is possible to do so.
mm,
Question is it suitable for us, or are they hiding things as well from our users?
on the link it says that partial support for open SSH style configuration files.
Yeah.
Oh, but it does support a lot. These are the
It looks pretty.
It looks much better than Paramiko supports.
mm,
But I'm still wondering why everyone needs to wrap SSH config options within their own Python library class. Isn't that super cumbersome? Why not just pass the SSH configuration, just pass it through SSH? Why having such a big layer on top of SSH? Don't get it.
I mean, I think this async SSH one is like a full implementation of the protocol. I don't think it actually uses openness.
I mean, yesterday we came up with an SSH library that as a prototype that is about 100 lines of code. That does everything we need, more or less.
It just wraps.
It just wraps the code to SSH, right?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if we need a library at all, if we can just wrap it in 100 lines of code.
Yeah. Yeah, perhaps not.
There is just one drawback, or then one specific problem that we need to solve. If we want to have the possibility to execute more than a single command on the remote host, we need a persistent process on the remote host, and that can either be a bash or it can be a Python interpreter, but it needs to be some kind of a remote process that takes an input string and executes a command on the remote host. Because you can only specify a single command when executing SSH. So you typically would run a bash interpreter on the remote host to execute multiple commands. And that easily starting to get super cumbersome because you would have to wrap every single command that you execute on the remote host in a tiny Python script function. In a bash script function. An alternative would be to execute a Python interpreter on the remote host and then execute a tiny Python script, bootstrap a tiny Python script when starting the initial SSH connection, and that's also a bit cumbersome.
What Remoto is doing, right?
And that's exactly what Remoto is doing, right? That's ExecNet, but that's exactly what ExecNet is doing in the background. A third alternative would be to use SSH master control configuration option to have a persistent SSH connection across different calls to SSH. But that feels a bit cumbersome to me. I'm not super sure what we want to go forward with right now. That's why I'm bringing this up here in this group here. I mean, for me, the cleanest way of doing things is to bootstrap the SSH connection using a 10-line or maybe 20-line piece of Python, and then create or execute a remote Python function for every command that we do in order to get the result back to the original host. But I don't know.
That's Remoto, right?
That's Remoto.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or is there a way to run multiple commands in one SSH process? without having a remote persistent process that's running.
I mean, does async SSH probably can do that, I would guess.
Yeah, I guess it can do that.
There's a
The
connection
remote
state and then
SSH
the run state.
might be an option for us, indeed.
I mean,
Async
I think
SSH.
having a persistent SSH connection open should be a requirement because it's going to be too slow.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, we are doing a lot of calls that are individual calls, like Ceph-ADM LS, Ceph-ADM networks, Ceph-ADM check host, Ceph-ADM gather facts. And having to create a new SSH connection for every command that we execute is super slow. On the other hand, if we are going full into the agent, then we would probably be okay with having it non-persistent.
Yeah, I mean, it'll still be.
But I'm not
Still means
feeling
every
super.
action that we take, like, will be slow, right?
Yeah. But I'm not super happy. In any case, I'm not super happy. I'm not super happy in using Remoto. I mean, Alfredo really recommended us against using Paramiko because Paramiko is not as great as everyone
Thanks, it is.
thinks of. And I have to say, Alfredo is right.
Was this recent or before?
It was back then when we decided
Yeah.
to use Remoto versus Paramiko when back then when who created the SSH orchestrator back then?
Noah.
Noah, yeah. When Noah created the SSH orchestrator,
Yeah.
the question was Remoto versus Paramiko, and Alfredo was really against Paramiko, and I think he was right. So async SSH might be an option. Doing our very small implementation of Remoto might also be an option. But in any case, I'm super unhappy.
One crazy idea. What about to use SSH or, for example, Paramiko just to start, well, to make the initial operations with a remote host? And, well, we are talking about to have a Ceph agent in each of the nodes.
Yeah.
What about to implement a gRPC protocol between the different nodes in the cluster?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean that
you don't like
that
nothing about install things in have more infrastructure.
that RPC protocol can even be an HTTP GET request. So it's we don't need to implement a new protocol. We can just extend the agent, the future agent functionality to also deploy daemons and stuff like
It means
that.
the agent has to answer on a port, though, right? The agent has to become a server as opposed to it.
Yeah, we just have to trigger it, right? And everything else goes via the typical REST API that we are having a pull request already, thankfully. So we don't need to implement some kind of crazy way of doing things. We just need to trigger it.
Right, but right now the agent is going to be a client only, right? It's a pull model or whatever.
Yeah, it is. But extending it to also do deploying things should be not super complicated, I guess. if we can get rid of SSH at that point. But we still have to deploy the agent.
Yeah, but then it's like a one-shot thing, so it's easier.
Then it's a one-shot thing, right? Yeah. But that also doesn't feel that great to me. It removes a possibility for ourselves to have some working base layer where we can build the agent on top of. We are kind of removing the net beneath us if we're going that route.
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm feeling slightly uneasy about it.
Yep.
And if you search in Google for how to run multiple commands, it's always bash. Let bash execute multiple commands on a remote host. Oh, you're calling bash
You have to like
this
parse
bash.
you have to like identify the prompt, and that just seems like so messy.
Yeah, you have to identify when one command finished and when the next command started. So you would have to print a UUID between each command, so in order to be sure that you're not mixing the output of different commands. That's super awkward.
And the SSH protocol supports these like single persistent connection with multiple commands. Like that's something that SSH does.
Yeah, it does it.
That's like, yeah, seems wrong.
Maybe I'm completely ignorant here. Melissa? Any thought?
Like
Moto is looking nicer. Let's talk about all the other alternatives.
like when I was searching for like how to have like persistent SSH
I mean, the core
connections.
problem with Remoto is just that it's based on execnet, which is like completely dead, right?
Yes.
No maintainer.
And the error messages we get from remote is complete garbage.
Yes, is that right?
Wait, is it possible to like replace execnet with another thing?
Sage, can you hear us?
There we go. Sorry, I'm back. Yeah, I turned my volume down back. So. Yep.
Melissa, I think I should repeat.
Oh, okay. Wait, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I asked like, is it possible to replace execnet with another thing?
Like underneath Remoto.
Yeah.
And maybe replace execnet with.
Is it worth it? Yeah.
Oh, it's like for talking to. Yeah, I mean that part of the. I mean that part of Remoto we don't really need, where you need to like run Python code on the remote side. Like we don't.
No, it's super easy to replace it with some command like t and chmod, and that's everything we need.
Yeah.
So we completely do not need Remoto.
Yeah, we just need an SSH connection with multiple commands. That's like, I don't know. I mean, async SSH, I think does that. I mean, maybe it makes sense just to play with it a little bit, see if it's how hard it is. I mean, I don't know much about the async stuff in Python. I mean, can you just like write a synchronous function that just does the await and
Yeah.
then you know, I mean, it'll interoperate with everything else just fine.
Yeah, it's just a wrapper that makes the async function synchronous. It's super trivial to do.
Yeah. Maybe, I mean, maybe we should just play with async SSH a little bit and just make sure that it behaves the way we think. Because it occurs to me also that like the way we're currently using Remoto is, I think, a little bit dodgy because, like, say we do it, we open a connection, we issue a command, and then we like an hour goes by, and then we want to issue another command. If something screwed up that connection in the meantime, when you get time to run that second command, you're going to get a failure, right? Like it really seems that if you're reusing a connection, before you do anything, you should just do like a true command on the other side just to make sure that the connection is healthy. And if there's a failure, then reconnect and like make sure you have a healthy connection before you actually do your actual thing, or else you'll get spurious failures on things that you otherwise wouldn't. So it seems like we could write a pretty simple framework that just has these persistent connections before we issue any other command. We just make sure the connection's healthy, reopen or whatever, and then run the command. I don't know. I mean, I guess we have. I think we do like. Do we do timeouts on it? I don't even do timeout. I don't know. I don't know what we do.
Yeah, we have to make sure that I think SSH itself supports sending heartbeats and then closing the connection. I think that's supported.
Yeah.
Yeah, here it is. Here it is. Gateway underscore AR.py line 49. Yeah, that's where Remoto executes Python on the remote host.
Yeah. I don't know. I think my vote is async SSH to go.
Import this exec eval. Okay. Execnet is really evil. That just
I know it's
they're
yeah.
they're executing a CDN.
Yep. Yep.
Import this exec eval this stdin readline. Oh my god.
Yeah, I'll look into async SSH. It seems
Okay.
good.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it. And then if that doesn't work out, we can still look into the running remote Python on the remote host.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably take Remoto and like gut all the like remote Python execution stuff out of it and just use the like. Well, what does Remoto actually use for its SSH? Actually, is execnet doing the SSH portion?
Yes, Remoto is just a thin wrapper around execnet.
Because like if you look at the execnet page, like it doesn't talk about that. It talks about, well, I guess it remote processes, but it's, yeah, okay. And what does execnet use for its SSH then? Is it just running SSH like the command?
Execnet is just running remote Python on the Python
Right,
on the
okay.
remote host,
Got it. Okay.
and execnet is handling all the SSH connections,
Got it.
all the SSH connection handling.
Okay. Okay. All right.
And it is doing so by just evaluating everything that comes on SCDN.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. Anything else we can discuss today?
Um,
If not, I'm also super happy to just finish a bit earlier today.
Question for Sage, maybe more related to RGW, but I think you were working on with Laura Friedman, the RGW Ceph ADM integration ethology a while back. Do you know
yeah.
where that ended up?
There was a whole checklist. I think most of the stuff that was on that list is in place now. I think really it's the next step is like going through the test suite and like converting things over to use Orchestrator instead of the RGW task. Yeah.
Okay, so either the Ceph ADM support should be there now essentially, but
I think
it's a matter
so.
of converting the
I mean,
suite
they're
or
probably
finding
little
things.
gaps, but I think the big ones have all been, have all been addressed.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. Oh, I gotta, yeah. So I have more work to do on the NFS thing, and then on the dashboard RGW connection stuff, I think I want to just back to that pull request to put it inside the dashboard module instead of Ceph ADM because it's really about dashboard RGW and has nothing to do with Ceph ADM. So I got to do that. And,
Okay.
yeah. So I got some stuff on my list for today.
Yep. Anyway, I guess we can close it today.
Yep.
See you next week. Bye.
All right.